Good morning and good afternoon. I guess we'll get started. Welcome to the global seminar of the Global Columbia Collaboratory. I am Dean Shannon Marquez, Dean of Global Engagement at Columbia University, and I'm so honored that you've joined us today for this second seminar in the Global Seminar series of the Global Columbia Collaboratory this fall. Now, this fall, we're partnering with Columbia Global Center in Istanbul for the series titled Rising from the Rubble, Post-Disaster Recovery and Resilience, which will be focused on the earthquake recovery and rebuilding in Turkey. This program includes 3 global seminars open to the public, and today's global seminar focuses on assessing and addressing health needs of vulnerable communities post-disaster. And we're so honored to have experts stepping into the collaboratory with us today who will share insights on this important topic. And now, before we begin this important discussion, and especially for those of you joining us for the very first time today, I want to provide a bit of background about the Global Columbia Collaboratory. You see, the Columbia University Center for Undergraduate Global Engagement, in partnership with Columbia Global Centers and Columbia World Projects, launched the Global Columbia Collaboratory in May of 2020 as a virtual exchange initiative to support students around the world. The collaboratory brings students, thought leaders, and educators together. It promotes cross-cultural communication and enhances skills and global competence to allow students to reflect, ideate, and collaborate to empower them to make a difference in the world. Now, students have participated from over 38 countries around the world and are drawn from all 3 undergraduate schools at Columbia, as well as visiting institutions. This semester, we have around 34 students representing 17 universities around the world, and we have collaboratory students tuning in today from China, India, Ireland, Turkey, Italy, France, Pakistan, and the USA, just to name a few. Using smartphones and laptops to access the collaboratory virtual exchange platform, students form a community of global thinkers and problem solvers through participation in these themed global seminars, featuring international speakers such as our seminar today, as well as facilitated reflection, ideation, and collaboration activities. Now, as learnings and perspectives are shared across the collaboratory, students form project teams and collaborate to tackle specific global issues and topics related to the theme, and the collaboratory serves as an incubator for bringing ideas into reality and promoting new projects and innovative solutions to global challenges. Now, we are so thrilled that undergraduate students from all over the world have been actively engaged in the collaboratory every semester since it launched in 2020. And the program continues this fall with this very important and timely focus on post-disaster recovery. Now, I encourage the global audience to submit questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And again, I want to welcome everyone to this Global Columbia Collaboratory Seminar, and I want to thank all of our partners and our esteemed panelists. We are so pleased to be working directly with the Columbia Global Centers and many partners for these seminars. And at this time, I want to hand over to Merve from Columbia Global Center, Istanbul, who will give some introductory remarks and introduce our panelists today. Merve?
Thank you very much, Dean Marquez. Hello, I would like to say a warm welcome to everyone. I'm Merve Isfahani. I'm the Academic Programs Manager at Columbia Global Centers Istanbul, and I'll be moderating our panel today. We're delighted to be presenting the second webinar of Columbia Global Collaboratory on assessing and addressing the health needs of vulnerable communities in the aftermath of disasters. Natural and man-made crises continue to disrupt lives, causing lower-income groups, women and children, refugees, and displaced individuals to face unique challenges. Our distinguished speakers today will provide a comprehensive understanding of the gaps and opportunities in post-disaster healthcare, while also pointing to strategies to develop resilience and promote equity in disaster recovery efforts. Before we move on to our discussion, I would like to mention also that after the earthquakes, the Columbia Global established the Global Resilience Fund to serve as a platform for the Columbia University community to respond to major global crises in a coordinated way. The Global Resilience Fund is designed to harness Columbia's intellectual resources and practical expertise in partnership with local and country institutions to support recovery and resilience efforts and to enable research and scholarship that lead to increased understanding of the root causes of crises and development of novel, feasible, and scalable solutions. If you'd like to learn more about the Resilience Fund and our ongoing projects in the earthquake-hit regions in Turkey, please visit the link on the chat box. I would also like to thank Dean Shannon Marquez and Gail Lynch for this unique learning opportunity for students all around the world. I would also like to thank our panelists and our students who showed deep interest in this timely topic. Before further ado, please allow me to introduce our first speaker. Juliana Bol, PhD, is interested in evaluating the effectiveness, efficiency, and impact of health system strengthening approaches in conflict-affected and fragile settings. She's particularly keen on extending the methodological toolkit used in the health systems research space to estimate program and policy effectiveness and or impact using observational data and in the applications of contract theory to improve accountability and service delivery. Her focus is on understanding humanitarian and developmental aid programs in complex settings where both are concurrent. She has experience working in monitoring and evaluation and quality improvement of maternal and child health programs, primarily in South Sudan. Please, Dr. Bol, let me leave it to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And I will share my screen. I thought I would start by really talking about disaster response from a humanitarian perspective, and to start off, defining what natural disaster is. It's a situation or an event which overwhelms the local capacity. So it necessitates international external assistance to address the widespread destruction and human suffering. So this includes floods, natural disasters of geological origin, including earthquakes, disasters of climatic or meteorological origin, which includes hurricanes, typhoons, tsunamis, etc. One of the biggest humanitarian responses to a disaster occurred in Indonesia in 2004, which is one of the largest and most destructive series of tsunamis in recorded history. It affected 14 countries around the Indian Ocean. And again, this idea of widespread death and destruction. So 230,000 deaths, primarily in Indonesia, Sri Lanka, India, and Thailand. It affected 2 million people, including 1.7 million internally displaced, and 9.9 billion in economic and infrastructural losses. Another example is the Haiti earthquake in January of 2010, which caused 222,000 deaths, primarily in Port-au-Prince. So Port-au-Prince is the capital city of Haiti, and this resulted in a lot of deaths of government officials and destruction of government property as well. So it limited the capacity of the Haitian government to respond to the earthquake itself. 3 million people were affected, and this was compounded by existing poverty in Haiti. So two key lessons learned from the previous disasters, from the humanitarian disaster response perspective, is that cash transfers are an effective way of delivering assistance where markets are operational. And I mentioned this because it is quite critical and relevant to the Syrian and Turkish situation. We also learned that we need to essentially train local actors to respond to disaster response, this idea of localization, that the most effective and the first responders come from the affected countries. However, in Haiti, that idea of localization, that lesson around localization was not necessarily implemented. So there was limited engagement of local actors, and this coordination between the international humanitarian sector and local community, local counterparts was particularly weak. And this is something we also observed in the Turkish situation. There also emerged challenges in responding to an urban environment. So Port-au-Prince, there were issues of land tenure, people own property or rent property. And so it's difficult to actually establish housing infrastructure, remove rubble from collapsed houses. And there's also challenges in establishing water and sanitation facilities. So moving to the Turkish situation, I was in Turkey in July under the Health Equity Assessment and Resilience Tracking for Syrians project, which is hosted by Columbia Global Center Istanbul. And let's talk a bit about the Turkey and Syrian earthquakes of February 6, 2023. As you can see, there are 55,000 deaths and a smaller proportion than the Indonesia and Haiti situation, but 34.2 billion damage in economic damage, an estimate by the World Bank. So a much higher economic loss, 4% of gross domestic product. The World Bank also estimates that recovery and reconstruction could potentially cost twice as much as that 34.2 billion. Another complex nature of this particular situation is that Turkey hosts 1.7 million Syrians in specifically the earthquake-affected region. So about 50% of the population of Syrians within Turkey live within the earthquake-affected region. And this is important because while in Indonesia and in Haiti, it was more about internal displacement, in the Turkish situation, you have the Turkish citizens and Syrians affected by the earthquake itself. So the HEARTS project aims to really understand how the current health system is addressing the needs of the displaced Syrian and Turkish communities. And I came to Turkey to engage critical stakeholders in key informal interviews to understand the historical context as well as what has happened since the disaster. So I mentioned the Syrian population because Turkey is a signatory of the UN 1951 Refugee Convention. And this is important because this particular convention places geographical and temporal limits to the definition of a refugee. It states that a refugee is someone who, owing to events before 1st January 1951, flees their country due to persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular group, etc. So the events of 1951 is the important and the key point that I wanted to make, because this places a temporal restriction and also a geographical restriction. By this, we mean that countries could choose to define refugees as those events of 1951 as those which occurred in Europe, or in Europe and other parts of the world. So Turkey is a signatory of the 1951 convention, but not the 1967 protocol, which removes that geographical and temporal limitation. So this means that in Syria, in Turkey, the Syrian population is under temporary protected status, which was established in 2014, slightly similar to refugee status. This status allows access to education, to health, and to the labor market. Between 2011 and 2014, Syrians initially established private clinics to provide services to the affected refugee population within Turkey. But the TPS leads to a shutdown of these private clinics because they regularize access to healthcare for the Syrian refugees. And starting in 2016, with EU funding, the Turkish government has also established migrant health centers. And these are primary healthcare centers to extend access to health services for the Syrian population. Now, under TPS, Syrian refugees are restricted within the provinces where they have registered, which means that they need travel permits to leave the particular provinces. There are also additional barriers like language and limited access to specialized services. And let's speak about the loss of TPS, temporary protected status as well. So during the earthquake, around 300,000 Syrian refugees were displaced. This means that within Gaziantep and Hatay, for example, there was a huge damage in terms of housing, in terms of access to services. So PDMM, which is the Provincial Directorate of Migration Management, lifted these travel restrictions. This meant that Syrians could then leave the affected areas without having applied for a travel permit. They would apply for a travel permit on arrival to the places where they moved to. And this permit was extended to for 8 months. This allowed access to health and education services for Syrians who moved in the provinces they moved to. In places where they were less affected by the earthquake, Syrians had to apply in the provinces of residence. A second response to the displacement was that Syrians were allowed to return to Syria. It's voluntary return as of 14 February. And they were allowed to come back in Syria with the last date of return being 15th September of 2023. And over 98% of Syrians are estimated to have returned to Turkey. So what was the response in terms of access to shelter? Initially, a lot of informal tents were set up, and there was no distinction between the Turkish population and the Syrian population. But since then, there has been what I'm calling a formalization of shelter. This establishment of container cities, which are established by the Turkish government under the Disaster and Emergency Management Authority, AFAD. These container cities have separated Turkish citizens and Syrian refugees, but there still remains informal tents and informal container camps, as there are not enough shelter and accommodation sites for those affected by the earthquake. There are also these temporary accommodation centers, which existed even prior to the earthquake, and they are government-run housing facilities for Syrian refugees. In Turkey, most Syrians live outside of established refugee or accommodation centers. There are outstanding issues, specifically providing water and sanitation in these container cities. There's also a gradual shift to permanent solutions, so the construction of permanent housing. The houses being constructed by the Turkish government are prioritizing Turkish citizens who previously owned housing and who lost houses during the earthquake. And it's established that it will take 3 to 5 years to actually replace the damaged housing. So one of the questions remains what happens in the interim, in that period between the 3 to 5 years. And the second question is what happens to Turkish citizens and Syrians who did not own housing prior to the earthquake, and therefore who do not benefit from this construction of permanent housing. The social dynamics between the Turkish population and the Syrian population has also changed over time. We see increasing tensions, primarily due to the economic situation in Turkey. There's high unemployment, and which results in high competition for jobs. The EU has also established an emergency social safety net program starting in 2016, primarily to try to prevent irregular migration of Syrians into Europe. And the ESSN program provides cash assistance to Syrian refugees. I also argue that there has been limited support to the Turkish government. Turkey hosts the second largest refugee population worldwide, and it has been doing this since 2011, and that has a huge economic cost to the government itself in terms of providing health services, education, etc. And I think the global community has not provided enough economic assistance for the Turkish government to host this huge population of Syrians. The elections in Turkey also brought the Syrian refugee issue into the political sphere. And socially, we find that the closer this degree of proximity between Syrians and Turkish, the less acceptance there is of Syrians within Turkey. And I put this needs more information because I think is an area that probably needs a little bit more research. So there's an overall sense of fatigue, both socially and within the government, in terms of having hosted this population over the past more than 10 years. So what are the current needs? We found that language remains a barrier to accessing health services for most Syrian refugees. There's also limited access to specialized services, and specifically to physical therapy and to prostheses. A lot of people lost limbs. A lot of people need physical therapy. Yasemin will speak about also the psychosocial element of it, but there's limited access to these specialized services. There's also an issue of livelihoods. While Syrians are permitted to work within Turkey, only 5% have work permits, and they continue to rely on cash assistance. So this is a situation in terms of being able to meet your day-to-day needs. Another issue that I've not put on this slide is that to register under TPS, you have to have a valid address. So for most Syrians who have lost their address because their housing collapsed, there's a challenge in terms of maintaining that temporary protected status. We've also seen increasing restrictions for the Syrian population, mobile migration centers, which are centers which can ask any Syrian to show that they are legally within Syria. And if they're not legally within Syria, then they're sent to these temporary accommodation sites. And there's limited access to these sites for the humanitarian community. And also the changing funding landscape. We know that there is increasing resentment of migration, not just within Turkey, but within Europe, and I would argue the United States as well. So this has an effect in terms of how much funding there is for humanitarian response. So I think this is my last slide, and I want us to think about the second to last slide, the longer term implications. Temporary protected status is temporary. So what are the longer term implications for Syrians living within Turkey? The political reality is that there is increasing anti-migration sentiments within Europe and within Turkey. There's also a normalization of relationships with the Syrian government. And this bringing up this issue of voluntary return and safe corridors, areas under Syrian government control, and northwest Syria, where Syrians are being encouraged to move back to. I mentioned the deactivation of temporary protected status, and there's also increased irregular migration to and from Syria and to Europe. And we will see this continue to happen as it becomes increasingly difficult for Syrians to maintain their livelihoods within Turkey. So the outstanding issues remain that legal protection that Syrians are under, that temporary protected status. What is the longer term solution to this? How do we formalize the right to work for Syrians living within Syria and reduce and remove barriers? And also, there have been a number of Syrians who have lost their particular status. And I asked UNHCR, where do they fall under? What umbrella do they fall under? They're not considered refugees, and they have lost their legal status to live within Turkey. So what are their protection needs, and what umbrella do they fall under? I also think we learned several lessons from the responses in Haiti and in Indonesia, and we need to identify what are the specific lessons we can learn from within the response in Turkey. I think certainly the initial response to search and rescue, the collaboration among Syrian Turkey NGO sector and the international sector is another lesson learned. And this transition from temporary shelter to permanent shelter is also another lesson that I think we can learn from. So I think these are some of the outstanding questions that I think we have remaining in terms of the response to the earthquake in Turkey.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bol. And let me introduce Dr. Çağhan Kızıl. Kızıl is a geneticist and neuroscientist and associate professor of neurological sciences in the Department of Neurology and the Taube Institute for Research on Alzheimer's Disease and the Aging Brain at Columbia University Irving Medical Center. He received his PhD from the Max Planck Institute for Developmental Biology in Germany and conducted his further studies in regenerative therapies and experimental neurology. Dr. Kızıl's research stands at the confluence of genetics, neuroscience, cell biology, neuroimmunology, biotechnology, and drug development. He is employing advanced research methods for investigating Alzheimer's disease pathology, focusing on the molecular mechanisms of neurodegeneration and the possibilities for brain repair. Thank you very much, and I leave it to Dr. Kızıl.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction, and good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone. So it's a pleasure to be here with you and to tell you about our approach to resilience after natural disasters. Our project, the abbreviation is I HOPE, is focusing on generating a model for post-earthquake psychosocial recovery. And this project is, as Merve mentioned in the beginning, supported by Columbia Global Center's Resilience Funds and the Istanbul Center. I would like to thank them for their support and putting together this collaboratory and inviting us. I also have to mention our incredible local partners on the ground. Hatay Psychologists Association, HPA, it's led by Dr. Gülşen Filazoğlu Çokluk, has been crucial in providing the psychosocial aid to those affected by the earthquake since that happened and even before. Our local NGO partner, Collective Coordination Association in Samandağ and led by İlke Şanlıer, have also played vital roles in coordinating the logistical support and ensuring the operation on the ground. So without their dedication and presence, I think this project wouldn't be there. So over the past century, a little bit more than that, Turkey has been struck by many earthquakes and more than 70 major ones, which is about the magnitude of 6. So actually, the casualties, according to the official numbers, is more than 100,000, but we know that the real life toll is much bigger. And when we consider the survivors and their trauma that they carry through their lives, I think the overall toll is incalculable. So these disasters repeatedly highlight the country's vulnerability with large number of casualties and destruction of the infrastructure. I personally experienced 1999 Izmit earthquake that happened here, one of these orange spots. I was a high school student, and I firsthand experienced the emotional and psychological toll that the disaster took on my family and also in the community. That's why this project is particularly important to me. Despite this picture and the fact that Turkey's challenges in preparedness go beyond the immediate response, there's a lack of comprehensive disaster education. The enforcement of earthquake-resistant construction is weak, and building inspections are inconsistent. Political instability and the changing priorities frequently interrupt the long-term planning. While the Turkish government has made some efforts to address these issues, for instance, as Dr. Bol mentioned, establishing the Disaster and Emergency Management Authority, AFAD, and introducing regulations. But there's still significant shortcomings. Rather than adopting a universally accepted science-based approach, the government's response has often been hindered by mostly non-merit-based practices. For example, the critical leadership roles within the disaster response teams are mostly assigned based on connections rather than the expertise, so which of course undermines the effectiveness of the rescue operations and the delivery of aids. This is an image showing before and after one small part of Hatay, Antakya, so it's very clear. The earthquake last year was catastrophic, not just in terms of this immediate destruction, but also because it exposed deep systemic issues in the country's preparedness and the response. The earthquake affected the Hatay region, which is noteworthy to mention that is culturally and religiously diverse. It's home to Muslim, Christian, Jewish, and Alevi communities for many years. And the disaster affected the physical structures as well as the deep and interwoven social fabric in this region. And of course, this generated a trauma with a larger magnitude and multifaceted, and that has to be addressed. We developed our project in a way to partially address these gaps as much as possible in the post-earthquake recovery. We provide first integrated group therapy sessions that are specifically designed for earthquake survivors who have lost close family members and are bereaving. We focus on grief resolution and psychosocial recovery, aiming to reduce the symptoms of the post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anxiety, which is very common. We combine the therapy with electroencephalogram EEG analysis to create a comprehensive recovery program at a basic level that is possible within the limits of the infrastructure over there remaining. The group therapy sessions provide a space for individuals, and they process their grief and trauma in a community and together, and they offer also mutual support, while our EEG data allows us to observe and understand the brain's responses over time. So our ultimate goal is to create a scalable model that may be applied to other disaster zones globally or also to Turkey. Actually, in this slide, I'm showing the overview organizational scheme of our project. So we structured it around 3 main goals. The first goal is the takeoff which is the initial phase that we focused on team building, student engagement, legal arrangements, recruitment, networking, and so on. These are the essential legwork steps to get the project underway. And we are pretty advanced in this, and we established, I think we are very good in that. So the second part is the science part, and this involves conducting the therapy sessions, the analysis of the data, advisory discussions, and publishing the findings. And also this is important for us to see whether what we do is effective. And the third part is the dissemination and the outreach, where we are aiming to share the project's results through one legal frameworks, white papers, and conferences and publications. So here on the right, you can see three cores. We have an administrative core that manages resources and tasks. This is led by the PIs. And we have a scientific core that's responsible for data collection and analysis. And this is mostly led by the PIs, researchers on the field, and also the students attached to the projects. And we have a logistics and legal core that oversees the legal frameworks and operations. So we included several components to our project, and we tried. Well, the group therapy sessions, here the survivors meet weekly for 6 weeks in a row in small groups, and each session follows a structured curriculum that we also give tasks. For instance, the education about the grief and trauma, and the exercises in emotional regulation, and we also give homeworks to reinforce the lessons learned, and then so that becomes a little bit more interactive. We have the monitoring of the EEG. We have mobile EEG devices that we can move around, and we collect the data before and after the therapy sessions to measure the changes in the emotional regulation. This is kind of important because analyzing this activity in the regions, we can maybe quantitatively assess the impact of the therapy and come up with ideas for the future. And we have resilience training. Our actual program aims to enhance the participants' cognitive flexibility. This is also critical because survivors often experience rigid thinking and emotional dysregulation following trauma. So it's important to try to change that. And we have also an aspect of cultural sensitivity due to the reasons that I told you. Hatay is a multicultural landscape, and the program incorporates culturally appropriate elements. And I think overall this brings the innovation. We have a very interdisciplinary team, which is fantastic to work with. The neuroscientists, psychologists, and legal experts who bring diverse perspectives. Our lead psychologist, Dr. Gülşen Filazoğlu, has designed this therapy program and implemented the sessions. I'm overseeing the coordination of the entire project from the Columbia side, and I ensure the alignment with the practices, and we are constantly in touch and talking about the science. We also work closely with the grassroots organization that I'm going to mention a little bit in the next slide. For instance, the Hatay Psychologists Association, and we have advisors on the ground locally from Hatay Mustafa Kemal University. And we also have the collective coordination led by İlke. This is in Samanda, and that handles most of the logistical aspects and ensures that participants can attend the sessions, and the paperwork is done and the resources are distributed. So this is a collective effort. I think it's a cogwheel that all parts are absolutely necessary. So I think a cornerstone of our project is the collaboration with the grassroots and the local organizations. As I mentioned, the Hatay Psychologists Association plays a critical role in providing the first aid and long-term mental health to survivors. So their understanding of the community's need allowed us to tailor our interventions effectively. And they are now operating in an intern place at Samandağ that was generated by the Collective Coordination Association, which ensures smooth logistical operations. And I think these collaborations are vital because one, they're on the ground and they know what's going on there, and they have all the local networks needed to make our efforts meaningful and impactful. And these partnerships also helped us integrate local cultural values into our program and respect them in a way that that's the most appropriate. The tenets of our study focus on providing evidence-based, scalable solutions for mental health recovery after trauma. And I think moving forward, we are going to need, and it's critical for us to expand the participant reach to ensure the more survivors benefit from this. And we need to strengthen our data collection and analysis, particularly regarding the impact of group therapy and emotional brain functions. And we also would like to, which is an important part, we also would like to advocate for policy changes to improve the country's disaster preparedness and recovery framework, maybe pushing for more science-based and logical directions. So I'd like to thank everyone that's listed here and not listed here. So Columbia Global Resilience Fund was critical, and I'd like to thank them for their financial support and all support. And also our partners, Psychologists Association, Mustafa Kemal University, and Collective Coordination Research Institute on Turkey, and everyone. Their work has made this project possible, and also all people involved, especially to our advisors at Columbia, Dr. Richard Mayer, and at Mustafa Kemal University, and Efik Okaçia, and all the psychologists and students on the field, and everyone participated in the program. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kızıl, for this wonderful presentation, and we are also very grateful that you're running this wonderful impact-oriented project in Hatay with the Resilience Fund, and I'm sure we will talk more about all of these projects in more detail in discussion. Without further ado, let me introduce our third speaker, Bihter Yasemin Adalı. Bihter Yasemin Adalı is an expressive arts therapist and the clinical director of Maya Foundation. Her research interests and therapy practices focus on expressive arts therapy with adults with attachment difficulties, and more recently with children going through chronic illness such as cancer, allergy, and asthma, and renal failure, as well as other atypical psychosomatic conditions. As a founding member of Arts and Psychotherapies Association, founded in Turkey in 2012, Adalı continues to contribute to the growing field of arts and healthcare as the chair of the board of directors. Since 2013, she has been a lecturer, trainer at a pioneering graduate certificate program offered at Istanbul University, Istanbul School of Medicine's Foundation of the Psychiatry Clinic. Thank you very much, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks for welcoming us to this panel. We really cherish the opportunity of reporting back from the ground, doing our field work, that is art-based psychosocial support and child protection. So Maya Vakfı has been founded to restore a sense of children's normalcy, a sense of creative, free, safe childhood in June 2015. We try to support children after displacement, whether this displacement was caused by forced migration, war, or natural disasters. We try to offer a normalizing experience, an experience of recovery, psychological recovery post-trauma. We try to realize this vision by offering MHPSS and child protection services. We offer education and capacity building after disasters and emergencies. We try to support children and youth and their caregivers in dealing with past difficulties as well as challenges in everyday life. We try to do this by offering group sessions, individual sessions, positive parenting awareness activities, and social cohesion activities. So our programs are very often art therapy inspired and multimodal. We try to incorporate dance movement therapy, music therapy, and visual art making in the aim of promoting resilience and adaptability for children and their families. During times where we recognize red flag situations or children and families at risk, we try to refer them internally for individual sessions. And sometimes we realize that we have to refer them externally for legal support or for more logistic assistance. So we do utilize referral pathways and information services as part of our child protection. In the past, we have also created this model of care that we call trauma-informed schools, where we offer trainings and workshops for teachers and school counselors. And we also offer well-being sessions for formal and informal caregivers that are present in children's lives. We offer capacity building and employability services, and we train people who are working on the field, whether it's specialized technical trainings or self-care skills trainings. It depends based on the setting we are, and we offer supervision to follow up.
If it's okay with you too, because
Yeah,
we could
yes.
see.
As I've mentioned, we offer psychosocial support through our group sessions that are inspired by art therapy. And when we identify children who are at risk or they express a greater need, we refer them internally for individual sessions. And sometimes we refer them to child protection, or we refer them externally for legal and logistical assistance. We try to increase trauma awareness in schools by offering trainings to teachers and school counselors, and we follow up with supervision. We also offer well-being sessions for teachers and other formal, informal caregivers that surround the students. Since Dr. Boyle mentioned, there is a great deal of social tension within these communities, and we try to intervene to the social dynamic by creating cohesion activities where children and their families learn to interact through art making together. And this is a way we prevent peer bullying in schools. We also offer technical trainings and self-care skills for professionals who are working on the ground by our capacity building activities. And we have a history of mobilizing our teams after disasters and emergencies, offering psychological first aid and doing PSS sessions. We offer psychoeducation sessions to increase adaptability in the aftermath of a disaster. So here is our history of post-disaster efforts at Maya. Since 2020, we have done post-disaster work after earthquakes, the pandemic, the wildfires, and we have been on site after the Kahramanmaraş earthquake 2 weeks after the event. And since then, we have been offering short-term, mid-term, and long-term responses in Kahramanmaraş, Hatay, Urfa, and Adıyaman. So 13 million people have been impacted, and we have been able to socially impact 6,000 children and their families with our efforts. And we have partnered with local organizations, the governmental institutions such as Family and Family Political Ministry and local municipalities. So art therapy has a unique way of responding to trauma. Often the impacts of trauma are nonverbal, and it's really important to create meaningful connections between past, present, and future. The blank page offers a great ground where multiple realities can coexist, and through sharing the past that has been lost and the future that might take place, the pain and the hope, having it contained in one piece of paper, individuals are able to overcome their experienced pain and distress. When pain or emotional suffering is expressed in art therapy sessions, it helps a person generate their own identity and life story beyond the loss and beyond the pain. And through this process of creative expression, people are able to rise and elevate their spirits with a sense of beauty. So our art therapy activities usually have each an individual goal, identifying and prioritizing needs, building creative problem-solving skills, and promoting positive activities, managing reactions, and building healthy social connections are ways we do emotional work in art therapy sessions. As I said, with our holistic approach, we try to impact all the circles that are surrounding children. So we may be working with social workers, schools, local NGOs, volunteers, and families in order to increase children's and youth's well-being. When we're working with young children, 6 to 8-year-olds, 8 to 10-year-olds, and 10 to 12-year-olds, we use what we call the project lift model and photo lift model. When we're working with children who are even younger, we use toy-assisted art therapy, and we use a modality called Can Kucak, which is a toy that you could cuddle with and they could project their feelings and talk through the toy. We recognize that children and youth who are in group sessions sometimes need more close monitoring, and then we work with the child and the family through individual sessions. And when we're working with teenagers, 12 to 14-year-olds and 14 to 19-year-olds, we use models that are digitally assisted. Sometimes it's a digital app called Shadow's Edge, and sometimes it's a web-based game. We also use cinema therapy, recognizing their reliance on screen for social interaction, and they're interested in doing things that are virtual. We try to include digital models in our therapeutic intervention designs. Here's a picture of inside a container where we connect the phone for an app-based game to be projected on one of the walls, and they are able to play not in isolation, but play through community engagement. Next slide, please. And here's an image of digital Shadow's Edge. Shadow's Edge was originally created to be played in children's oncology wards, where they're needing a separate place to express their story and their emotions. And it's a project that's been implemented around the world as an oncology care intervention. It had started in Northern America, then it was carried out as a research project in Colombia, and now it's in Hatay. The app also has a creative workbook where children get to express more of their current emotional material. So we know that teenagers like to send each other text messages, and we try to turn the text messaging into an actual messaging in envelopes, and they are able to engage manually through this conversion. So we try to blend digital creativity with studio art practices, so they are able to visit a site in the game and redesign that site using art materials, so they feel a greater sense of control over their environment. So I would like to share 2 case studies. These are, of course, made anonymous. So they have a bit of fiction with nonfiction. This is the story of an 8-year-old boy who has a parent suffering from kidney failure, and one of the parents have assumed the entire responsibility of running the household, while we witness the boy as someone who's at risk, who is exhibiting prematurely adult behavior. He seems to put himself in the role of a father because the father is ill. Through our art therapy sessions, through the use of these animal toys, he begins to be able to play again. He identifies himself with one of the animals you see in the picture, and he says the animal feels unseen, the animal feels invisible. And this is his way of him communicating a sense of parental neglect, because the parents don't see him anymore, and he has to play the role of an adult figure. Through our work across 4 sessions over the course of 2 months, he is able to play again, and he is able to experience a sense of returning to a normal sense of childhood. And here is another case study, a story of 2 siblings who were orphaned after the earthquake. One of the sisters is a 6-year-old, the other is a 9-year-old. And they express different responses to grief and trauma. At this age, they are quite vulnerable, and they do have a lot of unmet emotional needs. They are now adopted by their aunt, who has already 4 children. So they are now in a family of 6 children, and they are experiencing difficulty expressing their genuine emotions and their needs. One of the children seems to lose a sense of boundaries and approaches adults to receive attention and love through physical contact, and the other one is very inhibited to express herself emotionally. The inhibited child is in one of our group programs doing art therapy, and in one of the sessions she feels that she could paint sadness on a mask and show the true emotion. And once she expresses the emotion, she is welcomed, and the fact that she could otherwise be perceived as burdening, she actually feels free to go ahead and show her true colors. And through this sharing, she feels cared for. The other child continuously seeks physical contact with the therapist, and the therapist helps in the way of building boundaries for her, where she feels like, where she is shown that the only way to express and receive love isn't physical touch, that there could be other forms of receiving attention and love. So these children both receive group and individual support, and I believe their process of psychological recovery is changed through their self-expression with the arts. So these are 2 of the 6,000 stories. You can imagine the number is small, but the stories are quite impactful. So we have a great number of ongoing projects that have been supporting individuals in the aftermath of the Maraş earthquake. They have been funded by numerous supporters. Finally, our most recent project is puppet-assisted play therapy for 3 to 7-year-olds who are in Adıyaman. Adıyaman has not received enough services post-earthquake. People have been living in the transitional housing, transitional residential settings for a really long time, and they have the container camps are located outside the city, so there is less of an access to social life, less of an access to schooling, and children who have been born in the earthquake, after the earthquake in the container camps, or who have been 1 or 2-year-olds, are showing developmental delays in terms of emotional and cognitive development. So it's really urgent that we provide services addressing the needs of these children. And it's hard to access, to reach these children with ordinary therapeutic design because they are usually pre-verbal, and with the current lag in development, it's even harder. So we have to use toy-assisted and puppet-assisted modalities. And in our current modality, we have a 6-session design where we partner with parents in order to practice our therapeutic process. We try to create positive experiences for the parent and child to bond, as the parents have been unavailable or emotionally unavailable due to the post-traumatic stress and the grief. They need a new, contained, safe environment to restructure their interaction and their playful interaction with their children. So we will be making sock toys and finger puppets as a way to increase parent-child engagement. So the current the themes and problems expressed in our group therapies have changed over the course of the past months. Currently, what we recognize that is emotional neglect and abuse are quite common. This is leading to boundary issues for children. Children often feel pushed into adulthood. They are parentified, or their emotional needs are invisible. There is an inability to focus or study due to household noise and distraction. There are very few or no services offered to children with special education needs. And we notice that the psychosocial development lags behind, especially in the children aging 3 to 7. Parents have unaddressed needs, the loss of privacy, their sense of guilt, their feelings of lack of support shapes their parenting. There are also adoptive parents who are family members who didn't decide for adopting, and they need assistance in the process of accepting a new member into their family. There is complicated grief on the parents' part, and there's a growing need for awareness groups around gender-based violence. So the question of how long is temporary really echoed with me, because I recognize the families resisting the temporariness. So it's a very different experience for the host community and for the guest communities, the experience of staying in container camps. The local communities experience a different kind of grief because they have lost their lifestyle, they have lost their ordinary way of being in the world. While this is the case for the local communities, the guest communities experience it very differently. Syrian families who have experienced living in container camps in 2012 and 14 feel like they returned to 10 years ago. So this can be advantageous in some ways because they know how to live in container camps. They have a greater adaptability. It can also feel like I have returned to square one. I have returned to the beginnings. I can't build a life here. So it can lead to a sense of hopelessness, or it can lead to a sense of greater adaptation due to the familiarity.
Yasemin, we are exceeding our time and we would
Okay.
like to have some time for discussion. Also,
Yes.
may I kindly ask you to conclude, and then I hope we will have some more time in the
Yes.
Q&A.
Okay, my final point will be living in the transitional housing situation with very few architectural boundaries leads to lack of emotional boundaries. The architectural boundaries absence create overstimulation and emotional exhaustion. The closer the families are physically put together, the greater the emotional distance, because the family members are ending up shutting down to their children due to the lack of boundaries, and the children are prematurely exposed to adult behavior. This results to early marriages and children's marriages with the desire of marrying off to be out of the container cans. We have recently launched Center for Learning at Maya Vakfı. This is to generate volunteer engagement as a way to cultivate teams ready to intervene after crises and to increase disaster response capacity with trainings for technical skill building. So thank you for your time, and I apologize for exceeding.
Thank you very much. And now we will have one of our students will join us.
Yes.
Havas.
And now I'd like to take the time to introduce a collaboratory student who'll be asking a live question today. Welcome to the collaboratory, Sinem Kavas. Sinem Kavas is a 20-year-old and a second-year sociology student at Galatasaray University in Istanbul. She's a board member of the Sociology Society at her university and is one of the founding members of the Ataşehir Youth Parliament, which aims to carry out projects based on the SDGs in certain places of Istanbul with a partnership with Germany. She has also been involved in folk dancing for the past 11 years. She joined the collaboratory to improve her intercultural skills, learn about how to put the SDGs into action, and to experience developing a collaborative project. So I'd like to welcome our student today.
Hello, everyone. First, I would like to start with thanks. On behalf of myself and my collaboration friends, I would like to thank all of the speakers, all of the participants of this seminar for their time and for sharing their experience and their projects. Before the seminar, I've just prepared some questions, but before them, I've got some notes, and as far as I understood, I've got some questions for all our participants. First, I would like to start with Juliana Bol. You just said a kind of sentence about limited engagements of local actors, and for your in your experience, you've just said that Turkey also has the same effects. And could you just elaborate on this idea a little bit briefly, because it's just interesting for us. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And I think it goes back to what Çağhan mentioned, which is that Turkey has this experience with being a major site for earthquakes and limited comprehensive disaster education. So you have this limited capacity to actually respond to a disaster like an earthquake. And so when the February 6th earthquake happened, there was a lot of the international community that landed in the particular areas. And we see this in very many disaster settings. When disaster happens, whether it's due to conflict, etc., there's this initial huge response from the international community. Now, within the affected regions, Gaza, Hatay, etc., you have this response by local Turkish organizations. You also have international organizations that came in to respond. And from conversations with key stakeholders, that collaboration, that working together to really address the issue was a little bit challenging. One person mentioned that as soon as UN OCHA, which is the humanitarian coordinating office, landed, there was a multiplication of meetings to conduct needs assessment, meetings to understand who is responding where, which was, of course, a limiting factor because it takes away from time to respond. So that's one of the things that I think as an international community, really identifying systems that enable efficiency in response is still a limitation.
Thank you for your response. And for another question, that's a little bit brief question, but have you ever observed in an area, post-disaster area, a tendency towards just being more connected with society, or just the opposite of them? Have you ever observed a significant difference between two?
I think this is sort of one of the reasons why we wanted to look into social cohesion. Because immediately after a disaster, what happens is there is the natural tendency to work and support your neighbors, right? So in almost all disasters, the first responders are those who are affected. So you have neighbors who rescue their neighbors, right? People who dig under the rubble, even though they are affected. And one of the things I mentioned was that the initial informal sites, the informal tents that were established, brought together both the Turkish and Syrian populations that were displaced. So there was a lot of sense of, we are all affected by this disaster. And I think that was a missed opportunity to try to improve this relations between the Turkish population and the Syrian population. And I think that begins to be sort of disentangled when we have this separation of the container camps, right? And a lot of stakeholders mentioned the differences in quality between the container camps established for Turkish citizens and container camps established for Syrians, right? Just the fact that, for example, the Turkish camps the container camps for Turkish populations were essentially self-contained, contained kitchens and water and sanitation facilities. And this is not observed with the Syrian population. So I think, and then also this sort of specific geographical distinction between one group of people and another group of people. I think in a way you sort of see this very overwhelming social support among the different communities. And as Kazan mentioned, this is a very diverse, culturally diverse community. And then you see over time this social tension start to emerge. And some of it also is, again, because of competition for resources. So I think in almost every disaster, we do see people come together to respond to it. And I think there's always an opportunity there to try to improve relationships between those who are affected by disaster. And maybe that is a missed opportunity in the case of this particular disaster.
Okay. Well, in light of the time, I want to thank our student, Sinem, for her question. And I'm going to hand over to Merve to answer any other questions that have come from the general audience. Thanks again to our fabulous collaboratory student for coming on camera and asking a question today.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Sinem. And perhaps I can ask one question for all our speakers, because in all the presentations we heard about working with vulnerable communities, and your work is always at the intersection of academia and the civil society. But then, there is also in this underlying theme that you all brought up, in a sense that, it's also equally important to bring in the public sector for all sorts of intervention to have an impact in the long term. So may I ask you about those, particular challenges and also possibilities of how to integrate government agencies in order to, as you work with vulnerable communities, because Yasemin, you are doing a lot of work with students, and we know that family and childcare is one of the most difficult areas to kind of intervene because it's really protected. But then we know that Maya Vakfı has a good track record with all the disasters in the past, but there are many other grassroots organizations who are trying to provide support to children and families and parents. So what are the possibilities out there? And Çağhan and Juliana working with refugees and also healthcare access, healthcare providers is another area of focus. And also like we can think more creatively about how academia and civil society and the government sector, public sector can be pulled in together.
I think it's a lot of relationship building when it comes to working with Aile Sosyal Politikalar Bakanlığı, the Office of Family and Social Services. So we try to locally be present in all solidarity efforts. When we receive a referral, we try to do our best to offer our services, and the relationship building goes from there. So being locally present and very responsive really has helped us stay in contact with the family and social services, as well as the education office. So local relationship building was the answer for us.
Maybe I can add. I think there's a parallelism between Merve, your question, and the general sensitive interaction between, from my perspective, the politics and science. So they just drive from different ends. So we generally try to understand what is going on and try to intervene and derive the information from the real life. And the politics generally tries to change the real life with ideas already there. So I think this interaction is sometimes problematic, and it requires methods and mechanisms that bring together these people to talk. Such interactions, especially after the earthquake, the local governments and the politics, the regulatory agencies, and the NGOs, I think in some sense came closer. So they started listening to each other. And we heard beautiful talks from Maya Vakfı and Juliana's work and others. So this may help. So probably increasing from the grassroots interaction with the politics may be important to really come to policy changes. But that's not an easy task. And as we all mentioned, time will pass and things will be forgotten, and the damage is the damage, and the demographics change. So there's bringing it back and offering generalizable solutions is generally hard. But I think it starts always from the institutions like Columbia Global. So that's why it's very important that we have this, so that bring together and amalgamate these two seemingly different sides, the politics and the science. So that's my take from how we can interact and how we can move forward. I think that's the first barrier and challenge that I always face.
Thank you.
I think for us, our project is slightly different than Maya Vakfı's project and IHOP, because we're not necessarily implementing an intervention. Our project is looking at how can we identify some of the core issues that are affecting Syrians within Turkey. How can we identify specific solutions to those problems? And how can we think about advocacy, both at the global level and within the Turkish level? So talking to all these different stakeholders, the main purpose of our project is to really try to effect change at that policy level, which is, as Çağhan has mentioned and as Yasemin has mentioned, it's very, very challenging. But even thinking about, meeting with UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, we met them in Istanbul, we met them in Ankara, we met them in Hatay, we met them in Gaziantep, and kept asking this question around protection for Syrians within Turkey, right? Especially given the changes in social cohesion. And what is the role of UNHCR in advocating with the government in this particular area? And so if you ask me, I feel like in some ways, UNHCR is abdicating this responsibility because the Turkish government has taken over the protection needs for Syrians within Turkey. So I think our role is to bring up some of these challenging questions in terms of what is the role of the global community. I mentioned that Turkey hosts the second largest refugee population, and I do feel as though the global community has not provided enough resources for the government to actually accommodate this population of refugees, of not just the Syrians, but also Afghanistan, et cetera, et cetera. And I think even our role is bringing up this particular issue, right? The UNHCR Refugee Convention is very clear that when people flee due to persecution, etc., they become the responsibility of the global community. And so what is the contribution of the global community for a country like Turkey, which is hosting 3.1 million people? And the third point I want to make in terms of policy questions is the European Union, right? Because the European Union is supporting Turkey, not because it is interested in investing in the Syrian population within Turkey. It is investing in Turkey because it wants to prevent refugees from irregularly migrating to Europe. So what is the role of those policies established by the European Union, and how does it affect relationships within Turkey as well? So I think from our perspective, coming in from an academic and policy and advocacy role, is how do we start to bring those particular issues to the forefront, and how do we actually discuss and try to find solutions for some of those problems?
To ask whether you have any other comments or questions for the panelists, also to one another, or any concluding remarks?
There was this big symposium titled "After Quarter of a Century After the Earthquake in Gölcük." So this happened in September of this year, and there was this great question: when does crisis intervention begin? At the moment of the crisis, shortly after the crisis? And the answer was months and years before the crisis happens, and during the preparedness efforts, when people meet during the trainings. So teams build after they have built relationships doing training. So I think I really value Collaboratory's efforts, and I hope with our efforts at Center for Learning, we will create relationships that will hopefully impact the next crisis relief efforts. So that will be my final remark.
Thank you very much.
My final remarks are really to compliment my co-panelists, because I think they're really working on an area that is critical, especially when you look at not just disaster response, but any settings in which there is displacement. There's always trauma, post-traumatic trauma. And we don't have enough evidence on what works. And what I hear is this really careful attempt at implementing programs and trying to get evidence that these programs work. And I think, EEG monitoring, I'm fascinated to know more about that, right? Art therapy for children and working with caregivers, I'm fascinated to hear more about that, because I think it has the potential of really contributing to a field that I think still remains quite nascent in terms of how do we address trauma among displaced and affected communities. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing.
No, it was great to hear the breadth of work going on here with my co-panelists, and I just would like to thank. And I agree, there are always, when you start something of that magnitude, you very soon realize the challenges and what needs to be added on. We already reached to almost 350 people. For instance, then we realized that our selection criteria has to be expanded and changed, because every group, whether it's a refugee, on top of it, whether it's a woman, whether it's a kid, and whether lost someone or didn't lose someone, it affects a lot their trauma responses, and that has to be addressed. So there's lots of challenges, but there's lots of opportunities. I agree that it's great that we discuss these and find resources and human power to tackle these responses. And I totally agree. I was going to say that, as Yasemin mentioned, I think we need to start intervention right now for the next disaster. Otherwise, it's always too late.
Thank you very much to all of our speakers for such an insightful discussion. And I mean, despite all odds, we still feel that there is hope, and you know, and this was very, very thought-provoking. Thank you very much. I leave it to Dean Marquez for concluding remarks.
Thank you. Well, we have had an engaging discussion on assessing and addressing health needs of vulnerable communities post-disaster. This was the second seminar in a Global Columbia Collaboratory series of seminars focused on exploring strategies for rebuilding communities post-disaster through multi-stakeholder approaches, integrating environmental and social and economic risk into fostering resilience, well-being, health, and sustainability. And we've been using this virtual exchange platform, bringing together Columbia students, thought leaders, and educators from around the globe together to reflect, ideate, and collaborate to make an impact. We are looking forward to the next Global Columbia Collaboratory seminar, which will be offered this semester. So please keep an eye out for the registration announcements for seminar number 3, which will focus on risk mitigation and long-term recovery, fostering coordination across sectors. And that will be on Monday, October 28th at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in the US. Thanks again to our esteemed panelists who joined us today from around the world, and to our amazing moderator. And many thanks to the team at Columbia Global Center Istanbul, Columbia World Projects, Columbia College, and the Center for Undergraduate Global Engagement. And of course, we want to extend a very special thank you to our collaboratory students, partners, and participants from around the globe. A reminder that a link to a recording of the full webinar will be sent to everyone who registered, and for others, you'll be able to find it on our website. Thank you again, and be well.